Okay, so this is France and Germany versus the Treaty of Paris with Grace Evelyn, Giselle Lucia, and Isabel Fabio. So what are the positives that came out of peace treaty for Germany and France? So the Treaty of Lausanne was the only one for Germany that was in Germany's favor since there was no negative or positive effect. And with France, France gained security from the Treaty of Versailles because they wanted Germany to be weak in order to present further damage to Europe and their country alone, and they didn't want it to prevent another World War. And the Treaty of Versailles fully weakened Germany through the military and economy, therefore being in France's favor. They also got parts of Germany's colonies, and another part went to France. And then the rest of the treaties did not impact France in a negative manner.
So moving on from the positives, there were also a lot of negatives that came along with the various treaties of Paris implemented during the early 1920s, post World War One. To begin, I'll be discussing the negative effects that were left on Germany. Most famously, the Treaty of Versailles itself weakened the German military and placed full blame for the war and costly reparations of the war on the German economy and government. As a result of this, many agree the full blame put on Germany led to the initiation of the Second World War brought up upon the Nazi political party. Continuing on with the negative effects of this treaty, Germany lost 10% of its land, all its overseas colonies, 12.5% of its population, 16% of its coal, and 48% of its iron industry. Not only that, but the treaty forced Germany to give up land territory to Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, while also having to return Alsace and Lorraine to France. On top of that, they were also compelled to surrender all of their overseas colonies in China, Pacific, and Africa to the allied nations of the war. And with all that being said, the Germans had a strong belief that this treaty was extremely unfair as they had not taken part in the conference. And on the other hand, other treaties like the Treaty of Lausanne were mainly in favor of Germany, meaning there was no apparent negative side effects brought upon them. Likewise, the Treaty of Sèvres had no significant negative impact on Germany due to their lack of involvement. And in the Treaty of Saint Germain, the German representatives didn't even sign the document as they were forbidden to do so along with Austria. Now we are going to move on with with the question, what were the negative impacts that were experienced in France? Many of the treaties emerged and publishing at this time had little to do with France in a negative manner. For instance, the Treaty of Versailles allowed for France to gain land, and in the Treaty of Saint Germain and the Treaty of Sèvres, France barely had any involvement or drastically occurring changes. This is probably most likely due to the fact that France was not the top country to blame for the war and wasn't nearly as involved as other nations. However, after the Treaty of Lausanne was created to ratify the incomplete Treaty of Sèvres, there was a bit of uprising in France. This treaty essentially took away French territory within the abolished Ottoman Empire and gave it to Turkey, as Turkey was now recognized as an independent sovereign state. Continuing, the Treaty of Trianon took place in France. However, France received no negative backlash due to the implementation of this treaty. So on this slide, I provided an image of the land controls on the Ottoman Empire from both after the Treaty of Sèvres and the Treaty of Lausanne. Clearly, it's evident that France lost some territory because of the Treaty of Lausanne, which weakened and reduced the size of the French territory. In comparing the two nations and the outcomes of the treaties, it was made pretty clear that Germany faced more backlash and punishment than France as a result of being blamed for the initiation of World War One.
Okay, so what are the perspectives of Germany and France and their positions on the treaties? So France still had some issues with the treaties because they still thought that Germany was way too powerful and they could create another world war. And even though they still managed to weaken the German government and still get money in their land, and the Germany, they thought they were treated too harshly and unfairly, and this is due to them being forced to pay a lot of money to the Allies. They were also forced to give up their land, and they were also blamed for World War One. Therefore, this implication and this entire treaty and the aftermath was also thought to be part and blame of World War Two.
Okay, what was the impact of the treaties on political in Germany and France? So in France, American colonists had long felt a threat peering over their shoulders, so they needed the might of the British military to keep them safe from France. Initial attempts at negotiating a peace settlement failed, and instead, France and Spanish diplomats signed the Family Compact, a treaty that brought Spain into the war against Britain. in Germany, when the German government asked U.S. President Wilson to arrest the general arms sites in to arrange the general arms sites in October 1918, it declared that it accepted the 14 points he had formulated as the basis of as justice peace. However, the Allies demanded a compensation by Germany for all the damage done to the civilian population, the Allies, and the property by the aggression of Germany by land and sea and the air. They were shocked at the severity of the terms and protested the contradictions between assurances made when the armistice was negotiated and the actual treaty. They ended up accepting quote war guilt cause and reparation terms was especially significant to them. The Treaty of Versailles was bitterly criticized by the Germans, who complained that it had been dictated to them and it violated the spirit of the 14 points, and it demanded intolerable sacrifices that would wreck their economy. In the years after, it ratified the Treaty of Versailles and revised, altering mostly in Germany's favor. In the picture on the right, these are the big four, which is Lloyd George of Britain, Vittorio Emanuele Orlando of Italy, George Clemenceau from France, and Woodrow Wilson of the US. These four met in the early 1919 in order to create a lasting peace and appease the respective constitutions back home.
So next I'll be discussing the question, what could have made the treaties more palatable to the public in both Germany and France? And for this section, I mainly grouped Germany and France together, as many of the citizens had similar or the same ideals and hopes that would come out of these treaties. From an outside standpoint, I believe if there was less, more thought out treaties, the people would be more satisfied and the situation would be much more less chaotic than it was. And the number of unnecessary public modifications of the treaties was unfair to the people, as there was a lack of clarity and caused a massive confusion, especially to those who were directly affected by the treaties. Not only that, but the people had little to no say of the outcome of the treaties, which exemplifies their lack of governmental representation and highlights feelings of helplessness and control within the population. Shifting over to just France, most, if not all, of the treaties and meetings were held in Paris, France, which was understandably a large inconvenience to the population, as their normal day to day routine could have potentially been altered because of the holding of so many meetings and the amount of excessive people that have attended. On this slide, I provided an image of what Paris looked like during the creation and drafting of these treaties, and as you can see, the streets and buildings in some areas were completely packed, which again could have potentially interfered with citizens' lifestyle.
Okay, what were the most significant short-term and long-term impacts on these treaties on Germany and France? So in France, the terms of the Treaty of Paris were harsh, losing to France. All French territories on the mainland North America was lost. The British received Quebec and the Ohio Valley. The port of New Orleans and the Louisiana Territory west of the Mississippi were ceded to Spain for their efforts as a British ally. Not only had the British conquered French Canada, they also won victories in India and captured French island colonies in the Caribbean. Facing this dilemma, French negotiator Jean Sinnel proposed a solution that redistributed American territory between France, Spain, and Great Britain. Under this plan, Britain would gain all French territory east of the Mississippi, while Spain would retain Cuba in exchange for handing Florida over to Great Britain. The British government also promised to allow French Canadians to freely practice Catholicism. The Treaty of Paris ultimately set colonies on the path towards seeking independence, even as it seemed to make the British Empire stronger than ever. In Germany, the population of the territory of Germany reduced to about 10% of the treaty by the treaty. It was impossible to get exact sum of the paid reparations for the damage caused by the Germans, but a commission that assessed the losses incurred by the civilian population set an amount of about $33 billion in 1912. The Big Four, especially Clemenceau, wanted to make sure that Germany would never again pose a military threat to the rest of Europe, and the treaty contained a number of stipulations to guarantee this aim. The German army was restricted to 100,000 men. The general staff was eliminated. The manufacture of armored cars, tanks, submarines, airplanes, and prison gas was forbidden. and only a small number of specified factories can make weapons or mutations. All of Germany west of the Rhine and up the 30 miles east of it was to be a demilitarized zone, meaning it was part of the agreement in the treaty that the military powers or contending groups forbid military installations, activities, or personnel.
This is our bibliography, and thank you.